Ancient Rome is remembered for its powerful emperors, from the first emperor Augustus to the last emperor Romulus Augustulus. But there were plenty of other Roman emperors who ruled the empire in between these two, men like Caligula, Nero, and Commodus. These names are well known even today. However, over the 275 years of the empire's existence, there were hundreds of emperors, many of whom had very long reigns, and so it can be difficult to keep track of them all. So here are 6 of Rome's most forgotten emperors, starting with the man who was emperor before Augustus, even though his name doesn't really fit into that category. Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus, inherited his great-uncle Julius Caesar's position as dictator, which made him the de facto ruler of Rome. But he still needed to deal with a few issues before he could take the title of emperor. He went to war against Mark Antony and Cleopatra to win control of Rome and make himself the sole ruler. After he returned to Rome, he took the title Augustus and became the first emperor of Rome. And while he's quite possibly the most important figure in the history of Rome and probably one of the most important people to ever live, he isn't often talked about when discussing the emperors. Most people know who Augustus is and what he did for Rome, but there seems to be a lack of interest in his life. It's not uncommon to find historians talking about his adopted son, Tiberius, the second emperor, without mentioning that Augustus himself was also an adopted child being adopted by his great-uncle Julius Caesar after his biological father died when he was only 2. This lack of interest might stem from the fact that most people see Augustus as more of a statesman than an emperor. He's remembered for the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, the 200-year period of peace that fell upon the empire during his reign and the reigns of his successors. However, this peace didn't come out of nowhere. Augustus had to fight a number of civil wars to achieve it. His victories in these wars led him to hold supreme power over Rome and its provinces, and it was during these wars that Augustus proved himself to be the ruthless leader that would help shape Rome into the superpower it eventually became. Some believe Augustus was actually a bad guy because of the things he did to secure his power. He established a secret police force, destroyed opposing political factions, murdered his adopted brother, and even ordered his own grandchildren killed. Yet he's still regarded as one of the greatest leaders of all time. His legacy lived on long after he died, and if it weren't for him, Rome may not have become the empire we know it as. The short reign of Emperor Nero is infamous for the destruction of Rome and the death of his mother, Agrippina the Younger. But the man who succeeded him is seldom mentioned, even though he reigned for 18 years. Galba was born into a wealthy Roman family, and he used his fortune to advance himself through the ranks of Roman politics. By the time he was 40, he was suffect consul, meaning he held the title of one of Rome's top elected officials. Then, in 68 AD, he was made emperor by the Praetorian Guard after Nero's deposition. At first, he tried to make reforms to help the poor citizens of Rome and reduce the power of the Praetorian Guard. Unfortunately, he antagonized a lot of important people in Rome, including the Empress, his own daughter, and the Praetorian Guard. They all conspired against him and killed him in 69 AD. Despite having been emperor for longer than Nero and being considered one of the less competent emperors, Galba is hardly ever brought up in discussions of the Julio-Claudians. We don't know much about him except that he was considered ugly and short and wasn't very good at his job. But perhaps he deserves our attention now for being an example of how not to behave as an emperor. After Galba's death, Otho became emperor for a little over a year. He was a former governor of Lusitania, now part of Portugal, and he was chosen by the Praetorian Guard to be their new emperor. Though he tried to make changes to improve Rome and abandoned plans to invade Britain, he's mainly remembered for fighting in the Year of the Four Emperors. This was a period of chaos in Rome's history when 4 men held the title of emperor in a span of 18 months. It started with Nero's removal from office and ended with Vespasian's accession to the throne. During this time, there were civil wars and assassinations galore, and Otis was right in the middle of it. After he was proclaimed emperor, Vitellius seized control of the legions in the west and marched on Rome. Otis fought back, and the two met in battle near the Colline Gate, where Otis was defeated. When he saw the hopelessness of his situation, Otis took his own life rather than be captured. He's one of only two Roman emperors to do this, the other being the aforementioned Nero. Like Galba, he had a relatively short reign, but unlike Galba, he had a much bigger impact on the course of Rome's history. Some say that without Vitellius winning the civil war, there wouldn't have been a Flavian dynasty, and Rome may have fallen into the hands of someone else. There were a lot of incompetent, crazy, and downright evil emperors throughout Roman history. But few were as evil as Commodus. Everyone has heard of gladiators in the Roman Empire, thanks to films like Gladiator. But not everyone knows that it was the emperor's father who started the trend of having emperors fight in the Colosseum. Perpetua was born into slavery, but was freed by Antoninus, the future Marcus Aurelius. He became a gladiator under his master's thumb and learned how to fight. Later, he married Faustina the Younger, the emperor's daughter, and they had a son named Commodus. When Antoninus died, Commodus inherited his father's role as emperor. However, he was a cruel and sadistic leader who hosted parties with prostitutes and abused his power to satisfy his urges. Eventually, his own mother, Faustina, and his sister, Faustina the Younger, had him assassinated in 192 AD. Unlike many of Rome's other emperors, there aren't too many sources that paint Perpetua in a positive light. In fact, the only ones that come to mind are those who profited from his abuse of power. He was a spoiled brat who got everything he ever wanted. And when he didn't get his way, he threw tantrums until he got it. History remembers him as a joke and a failed emperor who couldn't handle the pressure of running an empire. Most people have heard of Elagabalus, the spoiled kid who inherited the rule of Rome from his father, Marcus Aurelius. He became emperor at the age of 18, and thanks to his grandmother, Julia Maesa, he was able to keep the title until he was 19. That's right. Julia Maesa, the mother of Julia Maesa, was the grandmother of Elagabalus. She manipulated events to her advantage and gave her grandson the purple cloak, the symbol of imperial authority. After she secured Elagabalus's position as emperor, she acted as regent for him, ruling Rome in his place. She continued this charade until Elagabalus's death in 180 AD, when she proclaimed herself empress. But she didn't last long, as she was beheaded in the same year. While Maesa is the main character in this story, it should be noted that Elagabalus was an effective, albeit young, ruler. He restored aqueducts, minted coins, and oversaw public works projects. But his accomplishments are often overshadowed by his grandmother's scheming. Rome was ruled by a woman only twice in its history. The first time was by Julia Maesa, who only held the title of empress for a few months. The second time was by Livia, the wife of Augustus and the mother of Tiberius. She had a big impact on the early days of the empire, but it's often overlooked. Livia Drusilla was born into a prominent Roman family. Her father was the dictator of Rome, and she had several powerful uncles. She was betrothed to Augustus at the age of 18, and they were married a few years later. Throughout the early years of their marriage, she acted as his advisor and helped him make decisions regarding Rome. As the empire grew, so did her responsibilities. When Augustus became ill, she took control of the government and made sure it ran smoothly. She was responsible for writing letters to foreign leaders and making important decisions. She was even in charge of choosing the next emperor. Augustus had no sons, so he chose his stepson, Tiberius, to be his heir. Many believe that it was Livia who convinced Augustus to adopt Tiberius in the first place. Historians argue over whether she was good or bad for Rome, but one thing is certain, without her, Rome may not have survived. So there you have it, 6 of Rome's forgotten emperors. There are plenty more where those came from, but we'll have to leave those for another day. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and comment to stay updated. See you next time.